Hey guys, welcome back to another episode here with me. Today I have the honor of presenting Peter Wilberforce. He's a certified teacher of the Gabrielle Roth 5 Rhythms dance and a guide to the liberation of creativity through free movement and improvised singing. He's based out of Paris, but he runs courses all around France and Europe. And today's episode focuses on how constraints, trauma, and coping mechanisms show up in our everyday lives and get stored in our body from very young ages. We also go into understanding how expression through our body and our voice can lead to massive transformation, opening, and healing. So Peter's work is guided by the spirit of enquiry, encouraging a curiosity for and inclusion of all sensations, feelings, and qualities, as well as an openness to the humorous and the playful. Stay tuned. You're going to love this conversation.
How do we start to accept the constraints, even though we may believe that they're wrong,
Yeah.
because they're imposed? There's a certain place where, okay, I make choices and I accept the consequences of them. If I choose not to wear a mask, perhaps I'm going to have the consequence of having to pay €135. And also what came to me the other day is, I think it's really interesting that the word curfew, for most of us, we relate to something that would be imposed during a war.
Yes.
So we're in the culture and the vocabulary of war. And it struck me the other day is that, how was it in the Second World War for Europeans? You know, it started in 1939.
Mm-hmm.
After a first year, were they thinking, oh God, I hope it's over soon? After the second year, oh my God, 2 years. Oh, perhaps it'll be over soon. But actually, gradually, they would have found a place where they would have still hoped for it to be over, but their expectation of its ending would be really, really modified by their increasingly long-term experience. And I think there's something about going, of the little I read and hear, is some people are saying it's going to be another 18 months. Well, we've only done 6 months.
I know.
But so many of us came out of the summer thinking, oh, that's it. We did confinement. We did limited summer holidays. We kind of done, it's all over now.
So true.
And I wonder how I can feel it in myself is, you know, we all have that capacity to project forwards. To want to make plans.
To want to have things back to normal. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And it's never going to go back to normal. Mm-hmm. Economically, it will not be the same world when we come out of this.
So true.
You know, we have, you know, just let's be clear. And so what the question is for me is, and I really have to attend to this question, really for me, is when I accept that this is now and what is happening now, and I deal with what's happening now, not on the basis of I'm waiting for when it, as you say, gets back to normal, or when we're all free to stop wearing masks again, but how do I live now? How do we live in the present moment? How do we drop the stories that are guiding us unconsciously?
Yeah.
How do we start to bring more attention to the reactive part of ourself so that we can maybe find a way to calm it down so that we can see more clearly rather than projecting? What we do, what I do, the world won't stop turning if I stop doing it for a few months. If I don't teach a class 1 week, 12 people, 16 people won't dance for 2 hours. Fine. Not the end of the world. Let's get some perspective on it.
Yeah.
But to realize how attached we are to our identity with our work, which is, of course, what I
Mm,
know anyway.
mm.
But attachment which goes beyond sort of practical, evident logic.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That is so true. Like how much worth, how much of ourselves we attach to what we do. Mm.
And yet, what was interesting was a beautiful day on Sunday, and it was my day off. And I worked very hard.
Mm.
I did a lot of work last week, and I spent 2.5 hours in the garden.
Mm.
And oh my god, it's like the ego just shuts down,
Mm.
and I was just tidying the garden. I wasn't even doing anything particularly creative in the garden. But just that being in a physical activity, which was not just about me, it was about attending to something outside myself.
Mm.
Knowing that if I do this work now, then I will can benefit from it later.
Mhm.
And I came back in at the end of those 2.5 hours, and my body was a bit tired and a bit sore from being an old fucker who can hardly bend over anymore. Um, but the texture of my body and the sensations were so kind of, the only word I can use is de-stressed,
Mm. Mm.
because this noodle wasn't going bonkers the whole time.
Wow.
And the garden doesn't happen if I'm not really present to what's happening in the moment.
Mhm.
So how do I bring that attention to my
Mm.
practice?
It's a powerful question. It's true.
How do I bring that attention to my daily and weekly work life, which is just, okay, this is what needs doing now.
Yeah.
If I don't do it, something won't happen. But also, I don't know and I can't control what will come out of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but it's interesting how doing something, just going back to that idea of our identity being tied up in our work, it's like, well, when I stop identifying and I just do a task, when I have nothing to prove, when there's no ambition,
Mm.
there's a cycle of investment and reward, sowing and tending and harvesting. And that's a cycle that's that's entirely regenerative.
Yeah.
And
Especially with no objective, right?
I suppose there is an objective in a way, but it's a relational objective. It's the
Mhm.
relationship between me and my garden, and as a consequence, a relationship between me and me, in some sort of strange sort of way, is that because if I put the work in, I benefit from it. That's the case in anything,
Yeah.
hopefully, but it's very material. And of course, in this world, it doesn't get me any plaudits. Whereas being a teacher, clearly, I taught last night and people applauded at the end, and you go, that's not quite what I'm doing for it. It's very lovely.
It's really interesting because I remember taking a course, it was a shamanics course, and one of the ways that they release is by being in touch with the earth. And in fact, they actually recommend that when you feel like really stressed or, your mind's taking over, to just go to a garden, put like a nice blanket down and just like belly down to the earth and just like release it to the earth and just
Absolutely.
like totally let it go. And I've practiced it and it's so magical, the
Yeah.
connection that
Yeah.
exists there. And so when you say that, I just think there's a special relationship that just happens and
Yeah,
it's
totally. I think it in a way it goes way beyond that, and this is part of what interests me, is that we have to accept being in gravity, whereas most of the time our minds do not want to. Most of the time our minds are going up and away and far into the distance, as far away from our feet on the earth as possible.
Mm. Mhm.
It's like, and it's the word aspirational. We all have aspirations, and it's
Mm,
aspirational is that energy upwards. So in the work, how do we come down to earth?
mm,
How do we accept being here now in this body?
mm,
And one of the first starting places for me has to be settling, which interestingly is a word that the practice open floor
mm.
uses a lot, because they're very aware of this need to just come back and be with. So, so that we can actually feel that we're carried by the earth.
Mm,
That,
mm.
and if we're carried, that means what could we let go of which we are carrying?
Oh yeah.
So there's lots of things like, how many of us have had this experience of being told to stand up straight at school? So what do? We all gonna put all this tension in the body to be as straight and ramrod fixed as possible. Well, if you do that too often, then immediately your habitual stance becomes one of tension,
Yeah.
because you've told so often to stand up straight, so you put the tension in the body to stand up straight because you've forgotten that as a child you could stand up perfectly in balance without using any effort whatsoever.
That's true. You do
This
forget.
is what's amazing about this is where we need to have more babies around us, because they demonstrate to us this possibility of being upright with no effort,
Yeah.
falling down and quite often enjoying it, not hurting themselves, and standing up again nonetheless.
Yeah.
Whereas almost the moment we get to school, when the indication is stand up straight, all us as children are learning to hold on to be as straight as possible. And
Yes.
it's interesting, my Feldenkrais teacher described it once, and it's a very, very good metaphor. It's like taking a whiteboard, one of the whiteboards, and instead of using the designated felt tips marker pens that you're supposed to use, you use the ordinary ones.
Mm.
And you can just about get that mark off
Yeah, but not
if you
really.
wipe hard.
Mm-hmm.
But if you continue to use them, eventually it's not possible to get it off anymore.
Mm.
And it's a bit the same with our tension habits, is that we start to, the more we hold on, each time we hold on, each time we hold on. And because most of us don't know how to completely release the tensions that we experience, if we hold a hand like that in tension and then we let go, maybe we don't go to the full release. So there's a
Mm.
little bit of tension left there. So that's as far as we get to. So imagine that's tension. Maybe the first time we get to there, tension. Maybe the second time we only get to there. Because each time we reduce because we don't relax fully. So eventually the tension gets
Fascinating.
imprinted onto the body. So we are holding all these tensions, which to begin with, to free ourselves so we can settle, we
Mm.
have to bring some attention to, just to go, oh, yeah, if I, wow, yeah, and then we just start to melt. And and so this is where this connection to what you were saying about lying on the ground, it's like, yeah, if I allow myself to be held,
Mm-hmm.
and the earth is the primary holder. The earth is the holder, and our ecosystem is the primary holder of us all and every living being.
Wow.
And then we don't want to be on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying because I find more and more, even on a personal experience, sometimes how much I've disregarded my physical experience in and the focus that I have on my mental
Yeah.
state. And it's really interesting because like I went through a phase where I had almost like lost touch because I wasn't moving and I wasn't doing that much. And then I started to realize that like my jaw was always just so clenched,
Yeah.
and it started to hurt. And it was only when I started to experience certain amounts of pain that I started to really pay attention, because it was like waking me up, like, oh my God, you have this buildup of tension. And and then I started to study it more, and that's how I started to get more into understanding all of this, because what you're saying is so, so true, especially what you were saying about like the body just starts forgets what it's like to really
Yeah.
relax, let
I
go,
mean,
be held.
yeah, I mean, I've really noticed wearing the mask is a real propagator of habits. I can feel how my tendency when I put the mask on is to clench my jaw.
Interesting.
you know um, then there's all sorts of ways of breathing and trying to work out how I can breathe and things, and this clearly, this is okay if you only have to wear it for half an hour, but if you have to wear, I mean, I have no idea how somebody manages in a shop, or the controller on the trains, people who have to do 8 hours a day
With a
wearing a
mask.
mask.
Yeah.
This is where I think there is a real issue around the danger of this obligatory mask wearing, is that it's definitely going to create patterns of behavior, reduced breathing mechanism, which is already
Yeah.
reduced because of the way we live. Um, there will be all sorts of consequences for wearing the mask. Um, but the immediate ones is what happens when we put one on, and how do we adapt to it? And are some of those adaptations putting tensions into the body, which then are gonna become difficult? I mean, I think it's interesting that at least you responded to your body when it started to give you pain,
Yeah.
and there are so many people who push through the pain.
Yeah. I know.
It's the whole idea of feel the pain and do it anyway.
Yeah.
It's like the only way I can evolve and get better, whatever that means, is to suffer,
Mm. It's
you
such a big
know?
motto in our society right now.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Well,
It
I
really
think,
is.
and I think, isn't it? I mean, I know uh, suffering comes with almost every, apart from Buddhism and possibly Hinduism, suffering goes with almost every religion in the world.
Yeah.
Suffering is part of, also, I think, the romantic notion of living. So you have romantic love, and then when
Mm.
you're out of your romantic love, you suffer. And then the 19th century image of the suffering artist, and the genius who needs to suffer to be able to put their amazing work into the world. So yeah, it's completely embedded in our culture, our psyche.
Mm.
um, and yet, actually, if suffering creates tension, so how can we possibly evolve if we're held?
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe we start to learn that the suffering's not great for us, but then, having lived with that suffering for so long, how do we then start to just gradually, and I think it's without judgment as well,
Yeah.
start to let it melt, let
Mm.
it dissolve. Some of those, and I think it's interesting, my partner would be much better to talk about this, but clearly, obviously, also, many of our tensions and the way we use the bodies are because of environment and because of our emotional experiences. So the way we've been treated as children, our
Yes.
experiences as adolescents, and that's created all sorts of the ways we use our bodies, some of
Hmm.
which are abuse, some of which are
Yeah.
traumatic. And so, of course, the other thing about any of our work, which is psychodynamic in that sense, is it has to be safe. People have to
Mm.
feel safe to start doing it.
It's so fascinating that you mentioned safety, because I hadn't actually realized its importance until like recently, because I've been reading so much also on like our sexuality, just our well-being, and like just and the word keeps coming up. And I always thought, okay, I'm safe. Like I've always never interpreted myself to be in a position of danger, or fortunately grew up in a family where I felt like I was safe.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and so I really feel like I was like, so I didn't realize the power of safety until I had been exploring this topic. And it's mind-blowing to me how it's the foundation to so much.
Yeah.
It's the foundation to any kind of, like you're saying, to opening up, like physically, to just like allowing ourselves to feel, when we feel safe, it's like we can surrender, we can allow things to be. But there's just so many layers to that.
Yes. And the thing is, if you don't feel safe, you go into coping mechanisms. And
Yes.
mostly coping mechanisms are about control, which means, and control is about holding on. So we're immediately talking about putting tension into the system.
Yes.
If there's tension in the system, the human being is not available, fully available. There is a limit to their expressivity. So if you're it's like safety could be, it's too cold in here for me. Now what happens when we're
Yeah.
cold? We go like this, and then actually, well, I'm not going to move when it's this cold, because the only way I can stay warm is by holding myself tight and generating energy by tensing my muscles. Well, then my dance is going to be like this, isn't it, for the next 2 hours? um,
It's so
um,
true.
and the thing is, therefore, is if we're exploring in our work the idea of the liberating the human being to be fully present and alive in the moment, and fully expressive and equally responsive to the world, then we would like the person to have as much of their being available
Mm.
in the present moment as possible.
Hmm.
And we can talk about the heart and we can talk about the mind, but most of the work, most of that happens happily, because we start with the body, the vessel, the vehicle, the home, the instrument, whatever you want to call it, in terms of our experience in this world. Because without the body, we're not manifest without the
Yeah.
body. um, so we start with the body. But I don't know if I told you this before, but when I first started teaching in London, I think I might have talked to you about this, is I wanted to start a class in South London,
Hmm.
and I called it Dancing on the Edge. And at the time, it seemed like
Mm.
such a fantastic title, because there was no class south of the river in London, and
It was
you know,
sexy.
going into Brixton was a bit radical, because
Yeah.
Brixton was still thought of as a bit wild, even though it hadn't been for 30 years. Um, and 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 over the years, what I started to realize was, what a stupid title.
Interesting.
Because, well, for a start, it says, so does that mean that beyond where I was teaching, the location where I was teaching doesn't exist,
Mm.
or is foreign country? So it's already very insulting. Uh, but also, in terms of the body and the experience in the body, it's like, if you're on the edge, most of the time, most of us will employ controlling methods not to fall off,
Mm.
not to fall over.
Hmm.
So that dancing on the edge is putting ourselves to our limits. When we are at our limits, we tend to try to control so we don't go beyond our limits. And a very wonderful teacher called Andre Juhan, who is one of the creators of open floor work, always talks about speed limits. And this is something about safety as well, in that you have to, in a workshop, be able to respect your own speed limit.
Interesting.
And everybody's speed limit is different.
Hmm.
If you come in and your speed limit is 10k an hour, you simply will not be able to deal with an exercise that obliges you to suddenly go at 40 kilometers an hour.
Mm. Hmm.
There might be somebody else who comes in who has a speed limit, a trust capacity, a jump in and who gives a fuck capacity of 35 kilometers an hour already. So 40 is not a big deal. But for the person who goes, I'm a bit, I don't know. No, and and they suddenly feel pushed into a place where this is too fast for them.
Yeah,
They're just going to shut down.
it's true.
So whatever we do when we're offering our work, we have to respect the fact that people can only go at the speed that they go.
Hmm.
And so the safety thing in the work is about making sure as the space holder, so me, so any other teacher, um, makes each person in the room feel, hopefully, that what is being asked of them doesn't overwhelm them,
Yeah.
and they feel free to act as they need to act,
Hmm.
and that they will be picked up and taken care of if anything goes, gets too much.
Yeah.
And hopefully we as the teachers will hold that space so that they can do the work,
Hmm.
can feel safe. And when we're talking about children, basically we're talking about addressing our inner child so deeply. When we watch children who feel safe, they run around like mad things, they do god knows what, and they will fall over and they won't cry, they won't worry, they'll just get up and they'll keep going because they feel safe,
Yeah.
because they feel, I think it's this thing. I often think about it in terms of, for my own self, and I definitely hold it for lots of the people in my classes and workshops, is how much we as babies, when we're first born, are welcomed into our bodies and affirmed in our bodies by our mothers.
Mm.
So literally the thing is, you are here now, you are in this matter, this is your home, and the only thing that is certain in this life is this body. It may
Wow.
change. Well, it will change.
For sure. Yeah.
It will change. It may not be able to. You'll discover amazing things that you can do over your lifetime, and then you won't be able to do them all again. And
Yeah.
you might have some things where you go, I was doing that, and now I can't do it at all. Also things. But the basic thing is, this basic matter is the only thing that we can be sure of in this world.
Yeah.
But if when we first start our lives, nobody says, here's your home,
Mm.
this is where you live, I can certainly feel within me this child, this baby that didn't, kind of almost wanted to leave,
Yes.
because nobody was saying, here, come, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. So safety starts right from the get-go.
And I think you just brought up something that's like really fascinated me for so long, which is this difference or this understanding of the fact that, for instance, okay, well, actually, I wanted to bring up two things. The other one was like, do you think then, because you talked about how kids feel safe, like, so it seems almost as though safety is unlearned, or what is it like? Do we,
Oh, great
how,
question.
hmm? Yeah,
Great
because I'm
question.
wondering, because if they're so safe, I wonder at what point, and maybe it's not specific for everyone. Of course, this changes throughout life, and like you said, our physical experiences, you know, they change all the time. But where does the unsafety then start to unfold? Like I always ask
Well,
myself,
it could be from the moment from you're born. Could be from the moment you're born.
yeah,
I don't think children automatically feel safe.
interesting.
When I say you see children running around wildly, and they fall over and they get up and all of that, there's
Hmm.
a place where they have the mother first and foremost, but the parents, the carers, have
Yeah,
to create this space where it's okay.
yeah. Okay, I see what you mean.
The safety is not something that a child I don't think safety is something a child automatically feels. I think it's what we create for them. It's like, yeah. And so it could, the lack of safety could start from the very moment you're born.
Hmm.
So orphans and who are just then abandoned.
Yes,
You
that's a good
know,
point.
um,
Hmm.
you think about these shocking story that was in the news the other day: women had um, who had been captured by Daesh, um, Islamic State, and then had children by the fighters of the Islamic State. They're Iraqi women. They want to return home. They've had their kids. And the Iraqi, what can you say it? Iraqi society won't accept these children back. So these Iraqi women who, as far as I understand, are in Syria at the moment. I mean, I might get some of this story wrong, but you just think about little children who are utterly innocent
Yeah.
and who potentially will be abandoned because these women are between a rock and a hard place, between the devil and the deep blue sea. How do they choose? How do they choose? But they're the mother, they're the adult, and the child can take no action under those circumstances. So that's a
Hmm.
really, really extreme example. But
Yeah.
it is, it's like how do parents, if parents divorce, how do parents in the midst of their difficulties keep their priority focused onto the security and the well-being of their children?
Mm.
And
Mm.
that's often something which I think gets forgotten.
Yeah.
That from my generation, and I think it's changed now massively. But I can remember like 30 years ago, the phrase would be, "Oh no, children are resilient; they bounce back." Bollocks. They don't. They swallow it, they integrate it, and they behave according to what is expected of them.
Totally. Yeah.
You know, and this is, and in my lifetime, I'd go, and I'm really happy to say now, almost nobody assumes that children are resilient.
Hmm.
you know Happily, child psychology has evolved enough to go, no, children manage. They learn to manage their feelings. They learn to adapt, to fit in, so that they have some level of safety, security, let's call it there. And I think that adaptation is means that they are, we come back to the tensions in the body. They are stuffing things down which ideally should be expressed. And an ex-partner of mine once referred to, he couldn't deal with the end of our relationship, so he referred to it as a pot of porridge, a bowl of porridge that he put in a cupboard, and he shut the door. And I just noted to him that, well, yeah, the trouble with the porridge is it hasn't gone away, has it? It's still there. So years later, if you open that cupboard door, that porridge is going to be like probably some big monster that's just going to flop out on top of you. Um, but it's absolutely the same thing. If we keep stuffing things down
Yeah.
that are energetic, experiential, emotional, psychological, where do they go? They have to go somewhere if they're not let out. And again, coming back to babies, children, when they learn that crying is not acceptable,
Mm.
I think I mentioned this last time, learn to swallow their
Mm.
crying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're busy just breathing in. They're not breathing out anymore. And they're
Yeah.
certainly not expressing their unhappiness. So gradually, and this is fundamental in terms of voice work, particularly, gradually and quite early in their lives, their breathing mechanisms get messed around
Yeah. Yeah.
because they learn dysfunctional breathing based on fitting in with the world.
Yes.
So when it comes to, I'm sure you've witnessed this, is that, you can be in a room with people dancing and noticing, for me in particular, and more and more important, it's like, it's no good just moving your body if you don't connect it to your breathing, if you're
Mm.
not aware about how you're breathing when you're moving, if there's not the possibility of full and free breathing, um, because how can your body be free if the body is not breathing fully?
Mm.
And equally, if you're somebody who really, really learned to swallow your breath and not let a sound out, what singing is going to be a nightmare because you'll have such an impoverished relationship to the out breath.
Wow.
And the out breath, I mean, this is coming off the top of my head. It's great talking with you because this just stuff come out. But you kind of go, it therefore also means that the out breath becomes an incredibly dangerous place.
Interesting. So tell me more about that. That's fascinating
Well,
because I've personally struggled with the out breath myself. My
the
in
thing,
breaths are always so much longer.
yeah, and yet, relaxation techniques and yoga techniques of breathing always propose the idea that the out breath is longer than the in breath, which
Hmm.
is interesting. Um, I my belief. No, that's an exaggeration. Um, I think that it's something around fear of dying. That's to be very grand
Interesting.
about it. That there's that we don't breathe out fully because we're scared it might be the last breath. On
Wow.
a very, very primal, basic level, way back in our psyche.
Hmm.
And I may be wrong, but there's something about, to breathe out fully, I have to be able to let it go.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
have to be prepared to never breathe in again. That's at its most extreme way of
Yeah.
talking about it.
It's
But it's like,
fascinating.
but it's also so therefore that would make my in breath the first in breath of my life every time.
Mm.
Am I prepared to let life in fully? So
Wow.
other people have a difficult relationship with the in breath. I open to life.
Hmm.
If where have I closed down in life so that actually life is scary? And so I breathe just enough to keep me going
Yeah.
along, and this is all right, and this is okay. Okay, yeah. I'm just about, and I'm breathing here, and it's all right because I don't really want to go down into my belly and my emotions. I really don't want to go into my genitals where there's all sorts of complicated things going on. I just live
Mm.
here. And so if I'm invited to sing, I go, hello, I'm just going to sing now. La, la, la. And it's all a little bit kind of, because that's as far as I can breathe down,
Wow.
because any further requires me to encounter my body.
Mm.
Any further requires me to come down into what may be very difficult areas for some people. And again, we're back to the possibility of trauma, abuse, insecurity, you know. Um, I mean, it's also true that there are some mechanical injuries which often
Mm.
lead people to, let's call it, deform or adapt their breathing to accommodate the very basic physical limitations. So I knew a woman once who had such severe problems with her lower spine that she was in pain pretty constantly.
Mm. Mhm.
So the consequence was she breathed up here. But the consequence of that, because nobody had invited to explore the possibilities of finding ways to breathe more fully, was that she lived up here,
Mm.
which of course meant her emotions were really high because there was no ground. So we come back to our settling.
Yes.
How do we ground when what do we need to learn in order to just allow ourselves to soften down, accommodating our limitations, not rejecting them, accommodating and learning how to work with them. And the other thing which is really interesting, which my Feldenkrais teacher, François Combeau,
Fascinating.
talked about, is that there was, I think it's less so now, which is great. There's so many things that have started to shift to a more positive place in the last 10, 15 years. But there was a lot when we were all starting to learn meditation around breathing into the belly.
Yeah.
So we all sit down and we start breathing into our bellies. Now that's not where the breathing happens. Breathing happens in the chest, in the rib cage, with the diaphragm. Most of us think that the diaphragm, when we breathe in, goes it doesn't. It goes down a tiny bit and it comes back up. So how does our belly go back when we breathe?
I've never questioned that.
We distend the belly because we're told to belly breathe. That's okay. We can undo that. But what it starts to do here is the mobility of the rib starts to get reduced. The mobility of the sternum starts to just reduce because we're not allowing the ribs to open and close as they are supposed to in a natural functioning of our breathing. So that, and then of course, if this is closing down here, you can straight away take the metaphor of, well, it's closing down around the heart, so therefore it's closing down around the center of our relationship center, our capacity to connect between one another. And then also you can add into that is that people have the notion that the sternum is a fixed thing. And that the ribs don't articulate with the sternum. We most of us can just about get the idea that the ribs articulate independently on the spine. Most of us don't think of this place as articulating, that there's a bony place here, the sternum, and then the ribs insert into the sternum, and that this all can articulate. But if we start to lose articulation there, then clearly we're also starting to lose articulation in terms of our expressivity, the possibility of expressing ourselves.
This is so interesting. Oh my goodness, because, okay, I can definitely relate to this 100%. And I'm pretty sure, we all in some degree have had an interesting relationship, both with our breath as well as with our bodies. And like you mentioned, there's so much power with understanding that if we keep it to the top, we're really high emotion. I can definitely I used to be someone who was like super, definitely could relate to what you were expressing there. So I'm curious, because if someone's like on this journey and like trying to figure it out and trying to surrender more, rather, like you're saying, like surrender to letting life in as well as letting life out, there's a certain like letting go of that control, those coping mechanisms that obviously we learned from our parents or society. And so I'm curious, like, how does one start to let go and like really understand and recreate that relationship to oneself?
How does one start?
Because I think what's really fascinating about your work, and I really want to touch a little bit about this, because this is essentially why I found it so powerful. The five rhythms is how we met, for sure. But also with your work with the voice, and like you're talking about breath, and you call your work body, voice, and being as well. So I'm curious, because where do we start?
No. As you're kind of evolving your question, I'm realizing that I think we start quite simply with the idea of there's nothing to get right, and you can't do it wrong, and that there's no right way to do it. Another Feldenkrais teacher, Scott Clark, who I work with a lot in London, I remember one class, it's one teaching that I will always carry with me. So he asked 3 questions. Where are you? Who's here? What's going on? I mean, that's the way I remember them. He probably
Yeah.
would say they're completely different. But anyway, I remember, where are you? Who's here? What's going on? And I think what's great about these three questions is that you can apply them to yourself. So where am I? Where am I in my body? Who's here? What am I bringing to this? Or what do I feel? What aspect of myself do I feel when I bring my attention to where I am in my body? What's going on? How is it moving? How is it breathing? What's developing? I can also use this in the outside world. Where am I? So my orientation in my room. So, I can look around, I can see my room. Who's here? Well, I'm here with Yvonne. What's going on? And the thing about this for me is not to try and find the right answer.
Yes.
Just to ask the questions. Where am I? I don't even need to know where I am. I just need to ask the question. And I'm instantly somewhere in my body. I'm exploring because I've asked myself a question.
Mm.
So if we were in a room together moving, it would be, where am I? Where am I in the 3D space outside myself?
Mhm.
Who's here? Yvonne's here. We're moving together. We're moving together. Okay. But the questions are posed every second of our experience.
Mm.
You don't pose them once and then try to find the answer. They're just a way of inquiring into being.
Mm.
And I think the letting go starts with, which is another thing which comes massively from Feldenkrais, is that it's inquiry, it's exploration.
Yeah.
It's not about getting to the end point where we understand everything, basically, because that's an impossibility.
Yeah.
I think
Which
it's
is key that you say that, because it's such a trap. I used to be there running
I'm
all
there all the
the
time.
the
I'm on it
wheel.
every day, every
I'm
day.
like, I gotta get the answer to this.
And the way I do, the way I remind myself it's not possible is I open Spotify and start to do a search for music and realize that not in a whole 10 lifetimes will I ever get to listen to even the music that's available now.
True. That is, yeah.
I won't be able to read all the books. I
Mm,
won't be able to watch all the films that have ever been made. On a very, very basic level, we can't know everything.
mm, mm,
So why do we keep trying to find the right answer? That's the whole, there we're talking about formatting and how we're structured, etc., etc. But in terms of our learning and becoming an evolution, personal evolution, it's to me, in terms of what this question around how do we start letting go, or perhaps how do we start settling in,
mm.
to just ask these questions gently without expecting an answer, just to bring our curiosity to go, oh yeah, my left shoulder's pushing forward, look, okay, okay, oh, where could it go to, okay, and I just start to follow it. We also then come into languaging of things, which is interesting, and which
Yeah.
is why um, I I just offered you this idea of settling in rather than letting go,
Mm.
because most of us will think of letting go as,
Yeah. A
yeah,
fall from the
hold
abyss.
something, drop it.
Yeah, it's true. That's a powerful difference. Hmm.
The trouble with dropping is it can be very violent. Yeah, how many things have we broken because we've dropped them,
Hmm.
rather than just actually, finding a way to place something on the ground? Um,
Mm.
and and how many things have we not dropped, which have then done us damage
Yeah.
because we held on?
Actually, it's so true. I'm so glad you brought that up.
So there's
Yeah.
a nice little
There's a play there.
contradiction going there. Yeah, I like that. Um, but if you think about letting go, and
Mm.
something drops, and there's a violence to that movement, and something which you just starts to dissolve and settle.
Hmm.
So the thing is, you can't control the trajectory of the object that you drop. You can't control how it hits the ground. You can, some people can, but dropping in its notion you can't. Um, Letting things settle in, settle down, settle. The process is one of softening, and I would use the word melting, dissolving, so that you can be with this letting go. Other thing, of course, is because letting go is violent, it can sometimes be terrifying to people and can
That's so
go
true.
way beyond their speed limit.
Mm.
Way, way beyond the speed. Often in class, you'll see people who just cannot let go.
Yeah.
So it doesn't help to just keep pushing them to let go if they're just not able to.
Yep. Mm.
So, what can we invite them to explore which will feel safe for them, but which will start to take them to a place of release?
Interesting.
And that might be very small.
Hmm.
They can feel a new quality of movement in their bodies.
This is really interesting because it's almost like the evolution of the movement is creating more space within that person's body for
Absolutely.
more expression, but as
Absolutely.
well, like you were saying, it's almost like there's more trust being created between what's moving through you, like you mentioned earlier about like curiosity moving through and understanding how it moves through your body, where you hold it, where it's
Yeah.
being
Yes.
so like where its space is. And so as that happens, because I just want to link these two things. You were mentioning how, as a teacher, one of the most powerful things you can do is create the container. But it sounds that the more you evolve in this movement, in this voice, it's like you're able to host that container for yourself as well
Absolutely.
within your body.
That's the whole point of the work.
Hmm.
If people who are coming to our sorts of classes do not feel autonomously creative, then we're failing them. You know, this is one of the reasons why also the Feldenkrais premise of teaching through asking questions and inquiry is so vital, because if I'm asking questions of myself, I'm not dependent on the teacher for the answer. This
Yeah.
is why the map of the five rhythms is so powerful ultimately, is because the teacher can't do my dance.
Mm.
The teacher can only open the space where I can start to explore what dance is happening through me in this present moment. Um, and that little by little, I start to discover the territory that is my body in movement. But that territory will always be different to anybody else's in the room,
Hmm.
you know? And so, again, coming back to what is the job of the teacher is to 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 offer this place of exploration to the participants whereby they feel safe
Yeah.
to take risks, to try the unknown, to feel uncomfortable, to not know where the fuck they are, you know, to stick around a bit in the not knowing, to be open to new possibilities, and just see how all that is in the body and move with it and start to feel that you're still alive when you try out new things. You're still alive when you let go, even though the idea of letting go might be scary. I mean, talking about letting go, it's one of the things. If I have a group where we're doing voice work, one of my naughty questions is, at what point do you get bored of not letting your voice out?
Mm.
So we go back to the person who's going, yes, I'm just singing a little bit because that way nobody can really hear me and it's
Yeah.
okay. You know, if this person wants to spend the rest of their lives living like that, then that is ultimately their choice. But I don't believe most people want to live like that. I
Mm-hmm.
think most people want to kind of, they have big hearts. Most people have big hearts. They've just got a bit squashed. Um, and I think that most people want to let their voice out. Otherwise, just let's be honest, being in my workshop would be pointless.
Yes.
That's not why they come to my workshops. But that daring, the taking the risk,
Yes.
you just have to take that step
Yes. Yeah.
and try. And I think what's really interesting about that is that when you take that first step and you realize you haven't died,
Mm.
you can take a
Mm.
next step. Oh, I've done two. And you can do another one. The other great thing is that the more steps you take, so in this case, let's say we're talking about sounds you make, you start to realize whether it's a comfortable sound for you, whether it's the sound that your body really wants to make. So, what's interesting is you tune yourself only by making sound.
Mm.
You can't
Wow.
tune yourself by imagining your voice on the inside,
Yes.
because that's not how it works. It's not a mental thing. Once you've sung a lot, you can feel what the resonance will be like when you make the sound, but that's a different story. But at the first place is when I dare to make a sound. Oh, no, but no, that doesn't feel right in my body. Okay, oh, that's where the sound is. Yeah, okay. And so we tune ourselves. We
Yeah.
tune ourselves also when we move. We know when we start dancing and suddenly we do a gesture for some reason that is just not right for our bodies.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And we go, oh, that's no, and we don't do that one again until it's right for our bodies, maybe. And it is interesting. I used to play the violin when I was a kid, and I often use the violin as a metaphor for the body and the voice. The violin does not. First of all, the voice of the violin is the whole instrument being played.
Yeah.
you
Mm.
know Secondly, it's not the violin that projects the sound.
Mm.
Thirdly, the sound is the vibrations of the body of the violin that emanate out. They're not a kind of line going off in some direction. Everything's in waves, energy is in waves. So the
Yeah.
waves come out of the vibrations of the body of the violin, the air that vibrates, and it makes those sounds. So we have to engage the whole of the being
Yeah.
for this, which means the whole body has to be available. And if we using that metaphor, lots of people, when you talk to them about the voice, they think the voice is here. Where did your voice come from? How many people will go here?
Yes.
Well, yeah, that's your vocal folds. That's where you can change so much with this whole area. This is
The
what kind
neck.
of brings your musicality in, although it's deeply connected to your heart and your belly and your pelvis. But the resonance comes from the freedom in the whole of your torso, and your bones resonate. All of your matter resonates.
It's
You
so
know, um, so if we only ever think of our voices here, it can only ever be that big.
mm.
And if you think about a phrase that people used to use for the vocal folds, was the voice box.
Yes.
Oh, well, that's great. My voice is in a box.
Yeah.
That's not very liberating of our sound, is it?
Yeah. I'm
And if
very
we
limited. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. You've suddenly gone, oh, it's a little box. Okay, this is my voice, so I sing like this.
Yeah.
So part of I suppose the settling and everything is, and so that gives us um, ease. Perhaps that's the word we're looking for.
Mm.
How do we settle? We settle when we come to feeling easeful. at ease with ourselves, at ease in the place where we are, at ease with the other people, so that we don't need to hold on anymore. You know, why do we hold on? We hold on to protect ourselves. We hold on because we were told to hold on. We
Oh,
hold on because we're scared of falling over, because mummy always made a big deal out of me falling over and therefore it must be bad. You
interesting.
know, it's all these things that the instructions and the environment around us which made us hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. And then I got, you know, for whatever reasons, you know, maybe uh, all sorts of awful things can happen which make me hold on, make me protect myself more. Well, I'm only ever going to let go of that protection, that holding on, if the environment allows me to,
Mm,
and I can trust that environment to welcome me when I start to find ease in myself, so and settle. So I have to feel ease. And that's interesting. This is really interesting because I hadn't really used that word before, but it feels really vital
yeah.
that if I can't feel easy and easeful in a place, i.e., that I'm a little bit alert and vigilant for what might be coming at me, well, A, my nervous system is over solicited, which means that the body can't settle. And B, my natural holding qualities are going to just kick in straight away, fight or flight, whatever the sensations you have. So we have to kind of, you know, we have to offer people this place to go, okay, just sit down. I mean, I often use the image of the body as your favorite armchair.
Mm.
It's an old armchair. It's a super comfortable armchair. You know all the stains, all the rubbed raw bits, but when you sit down in it, you just go, ah, you know, and you can just feel yourself. You know, I have my grandfather had one of those beautiful winged armchairs, and I can remember the color of the fabric, and it was one of those terribly mid 20th century kind of textured fabrics with a
Oh,
pattern in
with
a
the
kind of rather
print?
muddy, yeah, with a rather muddy
Yeah,
green, with that
that's
funny
awesome.
frilly piping all around the edges. But the fact that I can picture it and remember sitting in it and go, ah,
Yeah.
and straight away I'm in a state of ease, which
Mm.
allows me to settle.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll often use that to invite people to make less effort when they're in the vertical, you
Interesting.
know, and and uh, and in fact, it's interesting. A few months ago, I was doing a workshop and I wanted to do a relaxation at the beginning of a session. You know, often we do relaxations by lying people on their backs and they put their hands down the side of their bodies and they're completely straight.
Yeah.
And I suddenly went, yeah, but what about somebody who has a bad neck or somebody's lower back who that really, really doesn't like being flat out?
Mhm.
But suppose that feels like a really vulnerable position for somebody because that means their chest is more open, their belly is more revealed. So, in fact, I started the session just going, find the place where you're most comfortable.
Mm.
And it was really interesting to give them time in this place of just going, oh, yeah, I'm taking care of myself
Mm.
by going into this place of what's most comfortable for me. I'm taking care of myself, which means I can soften, I can
Mhm.
find ease. So I'm starting to settle.
Wow, this is so fascinating because I find that sometimes society pushes us to do more and like do more, add more, really push ourselves in order for us to transform and grow and evolve. It seems to be an adding on versus a taking
Yeah,
off,
yeah, no.
or that interesting relationship that exists there. So this is really interesting because it almost sounds like the more we actually nurture ourselves and give us that comfort that we so need and listen to ourselves, the more
Yeah,
space it seems that we create for their
yes,
expression
absolutely.
and that safety that we feel. So this is really interesting.
And that, but the word that you've just mentioned, space, is the vital one.
Mm,
If we can't find space, we can't make choice. If everything is
mm,
always about, doing it better, getting it right, improving, we start to push ourselves down a track which requires something of us rather
yes.
than exploring what is without
Wow.
expectations. So again, just looping back, it's a little bit like, can I breathe in as if for the first time every time?
Mm,
And really, oh wow, because no two breaths are the same. That's what we
mm.
also forget. And the moment we start to go, no, this is the way you should breathe, we've gone.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Basically, my premise is that any instruction or any idea that kind of puts blinkers on us by saying this is the way to do it, we are shutting ourselves down. So therefore, we are shutting ourselves down to the possibility of full and easy expression.
Mm,
Because shutting down necessarily puts tension into the body,
yes.
blocks something.
It's so true, and it just clicked. It's almost like we need to stop allowing the expression from coming out of us, or not out of us, but rather like stop being puppets to something that we've learned. Instead, allowing the expression to come from within us. It's like yeah, that forcing, that pushing of expectation, those layers
Yeah,
on top, instead
yeah,
allowing the
yeah,
expression to come from inside.
yeah. And it's so fascinating because the body is an instrument at the level of our DNA. The body actually knows everything, how to function well. It's our environment that forms us and forms our the way we actually function, which often is reduced. So the question is how we come back to, and as you say, and I think this is key, is how do we create the space for what is there to come out?
Mhm.
And it's very clear, and this is another place where Gabrielle was so right. Movement happens in space. Without space, there can't be movement. We know this. We've all been in subway trains where we are all squashed in like sardines. Well, you don't dance there, or let's call it a particular dance,
Yes.
but it's a bit of a squash dance. Well, we've also got on subways where 11 o'clock at night, there's been all that space in the carriage, and we've just come out of a fantastic concert or a fantastic exhibition or something, and we dance in the carriage because there's space. If we look for the space, we will find the movement. That doesn't necessarily mean that the movement needs to be huge.
Mm.
The space could be tiny, but what's the movement? If I go to the base of my skull where the top of the spine meets my head, and it's called the occipital, one of my favorite words in the English language, and it's called the occiput in French, which I just love.
It is a
So
beautiful word.
if you go to the occiput, and it's a little space, it's a connection space, but if you start to explore how you can bring what the space is there, you could spend a day just working around this tiny little space where the movement occurs between two pieces of matter.
Mm.
You know, the thing that is so interesting and so paradoxical and so difficult to work with in a way is the fact that nothing that moves takes shape unless we have matter, but without empty space, the matter can't move.
Mm.
So we're constantly in this kind of exploration. How do I release my matter, soften my matter so it can move while staying and feel that movement, which has no weight, moving through me, even as I accept the fact that I live in this body that has density and weight and texture and feeling and sensation. And I think this is something which is fascinating, because space and matter, basically, this is us moving in society. This is us moving in the world. We move in space between matter. We are matter moving in space. And what's so interesting when it comes to conscious dance practices and personal development work based around movement is that we manage to navigate the world quite easily. When we're in a crowd, in the metro, in the tube in London, or in the subway in New York, we move with the crowd for the most part. We just go, there's a crowd moving. So I don't fight it, and I move with it. I submit to where I can go. I follow the space automatically.
Yes. And also, like you're saying, allowing us to explore, allowing the time as well to
Yeah.
explore even a connection, like I can't pronounce that beautiful word,
Occiput.
yeah,
Occipital.
like occiput, and
That's the French. Yeah.
exploring that I don't know how to say it. I feel like I need to like read it, but exploring that space, seeing what's there, and creating time for that exploration. I find that for me that's been one of the biggest hurdles, is creating space, uh, for that to
Yeah.
even happen.
And that's really clear, isn't it?
Time,
Time
yeah.
is a sort of space that we're always in too much of a hurry.
Mm.
Again, one of the sort of images that I use, because I integrate some Feldenkrais work into my classes and workshops. And Feldenkrais is very much based on listening
Mm.
and a quiet, curious attention, inquiry. And it's about generally, for the most part, small movements, sometimes very complicated, but still small, slow. And not so often what happens is students tend to do the movement because they think they've been told to do the movement.
Mm.
So they do the movement and they think it's about just repeating the movement, and somehow something will happen. Or they have to do the movement right. Or the movement is a stretch.
Mm.
And when when you go to them, well, no, actually, I don't care how big the movement is, and if it's 2 millimeters long, then it's 2 millimeters long. The question is, what's happening as you do the movement?
Mm.
So it would be like, for me, and the image I use, it's like going for a walk on a Sunday afternoon in the countryside. If you decide to go for a big stomp and you're going to do 10 kilometers and that's your goal for the day, well, you're probably going to charge off down the pathway, ignoring anything other than doing your 10 kilometers. That's
Yes.
great. That's fine if you want to do some sport, but you won't see much of the countryside. And you certainly won't see any detail. So what is it? How slow can you go so that as you walk along this pathway, you can pick up as many details as possible along the way, which might mean that you suddenly become aware of flowers by your feet, or, oh, there's a bird that's just nestled in that, but whatever it is, but without taking the time to slow down and witness that,
Mhm.
you can't ever do anything other than repeat what your habits are, because you don't offer yourself new options for moving.
Mm.
So our some of our territory, once we've settled in, is to open up to possibility and offer ourselves different ways of doing things, different possibilities, which gives us choice. And once we have
Totally.
choice, we can become more autonomous.
Wow, choice.
Without
Mm.
choice, we can't choose. It's like, we can only choose from what we know.
Yes.
So if, like me, the only form of dance you knew as a kid was ballet, well, that's all you're going to relate to as dance.
So true. Yeah, the
So
movement is more, yeah.
and I think it's really interesting around education for people is that often what you witness is people who go through lots of quite conservative, mainstream practices and explorations in their lives because that's all they knew. And then suddenly they find something which kind of blows the walls away, let's say. And suddenly there's a whole new world where there's all sorts of different colors and shapes and flavors and smells and that you've never had before. But perhaps this is exactly what you needed
Mm.
to feel alive. But you couldn't know it existed until somebody offered it to you or you happened on it,
Yeah.
which is exactly what happened to me.
Yeah, because I was actually one of my questions I wanted to ask you is how you journeyed on in this on this path. Like, what was your journey like?
My journey was I was a musician at school. I played the violin and I played the piano and I sang. And I also had an amazing music teacher who was passionate about opera.
Mm.
And I fell in love with opera as a teenager and wanted to do theatre as well. So I did a theatre degree, but all the time still doing some work in opera, which I did. I had a year out before going to university, and I worked in opera houses then as a stagehand. I always like to think of myself as the worst stagehand in the world, hardly knowing one end of a screwdriver from the other. But it was fantastic time. I was so lucky. I had such a wonderful time.
Amazing.
And then, so I kept doing operatic things during my university studies. And when I came out of university, I just, in my wonderful, complacent arrogance of a white middle class boy, went, "Oh, I'm going to be an opera director." Yeah, and why not? So I
Space
worked.
and place for those things as well.
Yeah, exactly. There really was then. I was very, very lucky. And So I started working in opera. But all the time, I still loved dancing, and I was doing dance workshops and theatre workshops. And I had a burnout. I would call it now a burnout, but I was a very confused bunny at the very least in
Mm.
1993, 94. So I took a 3 months out and went around the world in 3 months, a little bit fast, really. But came back, and two friends just told me, two friends who I had previously done dance and theatre workshops with in Manchester, where I lived at the time. Um, and they both independently told me about this dance class, and they both said you'd
Interesting.
love it. And it was, of course, the five rhythms. So six weeks later, I arrived in this dance class, which was run by Alex Mackay, and for the next 2 years, I danced twice a week with Alex and 20, 30 other young, not so young hippies and all sorts. It was wonderful. It was such a liberation. It was like such a, oh my God, how heavy have I been with myself for so long? Um,
Mm.
and I very quickly wanted to meet Gabrielle and dance with Gabrielle. And clearly also, without wanting to underestimate it, it also gave me a little bit of an escape route. It gave me, as an overachiever, as somebody who was very much destination oriented, it was like, oh yeah, I could do this because I wasn't happy doing opera and I was confused about where I was going with all that. But along the way, what happened was the things all got mixed together, so that I had, while I was still directing, worked with a movement teacher who was Alexander teacher as well, and we had worked on a production where we decided we weren't going to plot um, any of the big duet scenes.
Mm.
We were going to work with the two singers so that they would be totally in the moment and responsive to one another. So this woman, Neve Dowling, did lots of Alexander work with them, and then we went into contact improvisation with them and did all sorts of work. And what was amazing was that once they got that,
Hmm.
their voices changed.
Really?
Because instead of trying to get it right, this is the plotting we've done, this is the blocking we've done, this is how you're going to do this is how you're going to do that, this is what's happening here. Instead of being in the I've got to get it right because that's what Peter and Neve staged, and this is what we rehearsed, they went, what's happening here? Where am I? Who's here with me? What's
Mm.
going on? And because they were free to be present, listening to the other, being completely with their emotional experience and in their bodies, there was nothing getting in the way of the sound moving through. So that really is that, coupled with finding 5 rhythms and then discovering Feldenkrais, is where it kind of all started to come together. The Feldenkrais was a real addition in terms of the opening of the space idea and the inquiry idea and the feeling the functioning of the body. But the experience of the staging and discovering the 5 rhythms and then just feeling this liberation of the creativity of the person without the person making effort.
Yes.
And that's not to
Wow.
say that there isn't an enormous amount of work to get there. You know,
Mm.
Feldenkrais created about 10,000 different classes. Yeah,
Wow.
go figure. Because he went into massive detail, because the body is an extraordinarily detailed mechanism. So he went into that level of detail. You do that work, you start to become aware of every detail in the body and its mobility and its function and how it can be mobile and expressive. If you don't go into that detail, it's like only having 20 letters in the alphabet rather than 26, or having only A to M in the dictionary rather than A to Z. Um,
Yes.
it's all these things. It's actually, our expressivity and our capacity to express ourselves is based on our vocabulary, be it
Mm.
verbal or physical. It's like when we first start, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is when we first start speaking French and we know 10 words, we feel about 2 years old, if we're lucky. And gradually
Yeah.
we get a bit older as we learn more words and we can
Yes.
say more sophisticated, articulated, subtle, creative things. It's the same for the body.
Yes.
If we think of if I just thought of my arm as not having an elbow or a wrist, the only thing I could do with my arm would be this,
Yeah.
so that if that's the case of other parts of the body which are able to mobilize, but I don't bring attention to them and
Mm.
explore the possibility of mobility, it'll be like I never have an elbow.
Yes. Just the straight arm. Hmm.
Yeah, it's we have to bring consciousness to things for us to know that they're there even.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then an interesting exercise to explore, a really simple one, is the spine, for instance. You know, most of us have a quite particular relationship to our spines. Most of us have places in our spine, well, we can feel it moving really easily. And then other places where, in fact, we don't even have a consciousness of the vertebra there.
It's so true. I know. Yeah.
And so, sometimes in that basic body parts exercise of 5 rhythms, when we invite the dancers to go into the spine, so often because people are not interested in the mobilization of the spine, in fact, what they're doing is they're moving the spine in space rather than moving the
Mm.
spine in relationship to itself. And actually, what's moving the spine is not the spine.
Yeah.
So this exploring of the body's mobility is not about initially is not about how it moves in space, it's about how it moves within itself. So this is why we're again in this amazing sort of balance of, in order to arrive at this place of free expression,
Yeah.
we have to go through a deep process of inquiry.
And it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I just recently heard somebody say this, and it hit me so strongly, because they were mentioning how there's a difference between understanding something and really knowing it.
Yeah.
Like when you dig deeper, is there really an understanding of it, or is it just an understanding of a concept, an idea of like a very superficial level versus like this depth of knowing that comes from understanding? And I think those two are so key. And we spend so much time trying to understand concepts on the surface and trying to understand our body on the surface without really coming into intimacy with it, and really and really because he was saying how that foundation, or that understanding of the basic principles, is really where the keys of everything is. You don't need to go any further into complicated processes.
No, no, everything happens if you're in the body and you're bringing your attention to the body and you're open. I think everything can happen. You need to have parameters to understand what's happening, and in certain
Yeah.
cases where we're dealing with trauma, which is not my area of expertise at all, we need to know protocols to be able to support the person. But I think it's very interesting that um, in the case of the work that we're talking about practice,
Yeah.
which means coming back and doing it. Oh,
Yes.
and doing it again. Oh,
Yeah.
and doing it again. Yep. And doing it every time as though you've never done it before.
Yeah.
So walking onto the Five Rhythms dance floor, not knowing what's going to happen,
Yes.
and being prepared to be naive and innocent and open and not think you know how it goes.
Mm.
So it's a lot of, if we want some letting go, it's as best you can let go of the ego, let
Yes.
go of intention, let go of all those habits about that drive you to get it right, to make yourself feel secure. I mean, this is a very interesting thing, is that we talk about security,
Yeah.
and yet actually what we don't want in terms of when we're in our own practice, it's just keep trying to find the place that feels comfortable. That's not to say we deliberately put ourselves in the uncomfortable, but that we don't avoid the uncomfortable, the
Yeah.
unknown, that we don't try to secure ourselves in the exploration space. And I think the other thing is to go, we took practice is not and I think this is the tricky one, is it's not about repetition. There's no such thing as repetition.
Interesting.
You can do it again, and you do it repetition in the sense of repeat and it will be the same.
Yes.
Lots of people go,
Ah,
oh,
yes.
I've already done that, but you haven't done this one.
Yes.
It can't possibly be the same. Every time, like I said earlier, there's no two in breaths the same. If we said, oh, I've already done that, I've done breathing in, finish with breathing in, fine, got that down,
I'm over it.
I'm over it, I'll just stop. I'm bored with breathing in.
That's amazing.
That's the, again, I know it's very extreme, but it's a little bit like that. It's going,
Yeah.
moving the body freely is always different,
Yeah.
but it requires us to bring that possibility of difference consciously to it. And then as we practice, it starts to become part of our being.
Mhm.
you know Feldenkrais says that if you are looking to rediscover, let's call it, good function
Yeah.
of a certain body part, you need to do the lesson which attends to that functioning the number of hours that you have been on this planet in this life. So for me to undo a problem with my hip, I need to do 57 hours of the lesson that explores my particular issue around the hip.
Interesting.
So there's a certain dedication which he brings to practice, to offer the freedom
Mm-hmm.
to the body. And Gabrielle Roth um, had the wonderful phrase of, "Do you have the discipline to be a free spirit?" And
Wow.
there she's talking about the idea of keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back, keep dropping into the body, following it, following it, following it, following it. Stop trying to work out what's happening. Keep coming back, keep coming back. Do it daily, do it, once a week if that's all you can do, once a month if that's all you can do, but keep coming back. Even when you're bored, even when you don't want to, even when it pisses you off, even when you hate the music that the teacher's playing. Keep moving back into the body and
Mm.
finding how the body moves you in this present moment.
Wow.
Um, and so that means that within the five rhythms framework, we start to engage in all, not just how the body is moving, but more specifically, I think for Gabrielle, more how the body moves how we are. The creative, emotional, psychological human being, all
Mm.
passes through the body. It's the only way we have to express ourselves in this world.
Oh yeah. Mm.
So I often railed against, do you have the discipline to be a free spirit? I used to rail against that. I hate it because I don't like discipline.
You're
Um,
like, ah.
but now I start to understand it, and I
Yeah.
understand it, I think, because Feldenkrais is not performative in any way.
Mm.
So you're entirely engaged in yourself.
Yes.
Um, because the five rhythms is a dance practice, although that's not what we're doing,
Yeah.
we those connotations are quite difficult to move beyond.
Mm.
We
Mhm.
have an aesthetic. We sadly have
Yeah.
aesthetic and performative judgments about our moving, which means some people will go, "Oh God, this moves so beautifully."
Yeah.
Well, yeah, their body is their body that can do that. What about your moving as your body can? Are you instead of worrying about how they're moving, how is your body moving? How connected to your body are you?
Mm.
And that's much harder if you're somebody who maybe, you know, has a very rigid body from years of working in the fields or something and not having danced very much. And suddenly you're surrounded by people who've been dancing every week for the last 10 years. Well, you don't want to be given the idea by calling it dance in a way, you don't want to be given the idea that there is a way of doing it.
Yes.
So we need to start with this connection back to self and this almost forgiveness of not
Mm.
being the perfect dancer, not being the perfect practitioner, just going, this is where I am. Okay, this is where I am. And
Yes.
just settling in, finding the ease to sit down into the body and just go, what's going on?
Wow. Oh, this
And,
is wow. Yes.
and then just following it and letting it develop and noticing when the mind wants to come in to take you away or push you in a certain place. And as with all meditation practices, finding a way to just go, okay, letting go and coming back to the following. I mean, it's fundamental to being human.
Yeah. But it's interesting because it's true. It's our sometimes I guess the values in society are in such conflict to this beautiful practice of allowing whatever needs to be expressed within us to be there. And you said like the discipline of being a free spirit,
Yeah.
and so that there's more and more ease with that expression of ourselves and that being and that coming home. So this is so. Mhm.
Yeah. And I think what I wanted to just say was, and because it's practice, little by little, your confidence in your own capacity grows.
Yes.
It's like, we were talking about tuning the body earlier.
Hmm.
So the more you tune the body, the quicker the easy you get to the point where actually the body knows exactly.
Yes. And
And
acceptance, no, too.
yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's all about that. And then because you accept and the body is like right there attuned, it feels amazing. There's no disconnection from, there's no disconnection between head, heart, and body and soul. Everything is aligned so that so that it just is utterly natural. And this is maybe, if we want a goal, this is maybe the goal that we're heading for, but we don't get there by making it our goal.
Yeah.
you know and but the more we have those little moments of yeah, wow, ooh, and we remember those moments, and we can bring ourselves back to okay, start gently, and seeing and being ready to be amazed, curious, open to being amazed, and willing to go where we don't know where we're going. And I think that,
Mm.
and the fact that if we can come back and keep practicing that, then gradually the instrument, us, the body, evolves a greater vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you start improvisation class,
100%.
none of us remember to go yes and.
I know.
All of us go no, no.
I was one of those who was like, no. And I was like,
Exactly. We don't get it first time.
yeah.
We sometimes, again, speaking a foreign language, we've both had those experiences where we've had to go, what's the word in French? Oh, I don't know, but I'll try this one. Oh, no, it wasn't this one. Oh, no. We have to learn by making mistakes,
Yes. Mm.
and God, I say that, and I wish I could remember that for myself.
I know. And it's powerful because I think the more we do it, with this inner work, and this beautiful work also starts to expand into our exterior, into our world outside of us. So it's like it's not just an isolated it's not just isolated work. It's also how it'll manifest outside of us and into our work and into how we express in life and into the dreams that we have or whatever that might it's so
Yeah,
true. So it's powerful.
absolutely. Yes, yes, yeah, definitely.
Oh, this has been such an amazing conversation, Peter. Thank you so much for
Right.
everything. Yeah, wow. I'm left with lots to think about. I love your work, and I love the energy you bring to it, the perspective. To me, it's really refreshing. And so thank you for doing not only the work that you do and for lighting up the path for so many others, but also for just being such a great teacher.